Hey guys, welcome to 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description. And here's what I need you to do. Make sure you subscribe to the Volumes YouTube channel to stay up to date to everything we're doing here on 3 and Out and the Volume. John Middlekauff, 3 and Out podcast. We got a lot going on still in the football world. We have several teams that practice this week. We had some stories flying fast and furious. A couple things I saw that was like, oh, that piques my fancy. That interests me. That we're going to hit on today, and hopefully everyone is having a good start to the summer. I guess let's start with this because I saw that Florio, Mike Florio, that is, who runs Pro Football Talk. You know, it's one of the biggest blogs in the history of the internet. I mean, he created a massive business. We all have opinions on the guy. But there is no disputing that PFT worked. It changed the game for a lot of people. And, you know, he's somewhat of a troll on the interweb, which I can be too, so no issue with it. I don't agree with a lot of things he says, but he did throw something out, just a hypothetical. If the equivalent of what the Saudis are doing with LIV Golf did it to the NFL, who would be the first quarterback to jump? And I thought, listen, with the golf going on right now, the Saudi talk, I mean, it's one of the bigger stories in sports in America. You could argue it's the biggest story in sports in America, that or the NBA Finals. And my first thought, it's fun exercise. Who would be the first quarterback? And then I thought, well, that is actually impossible. It would never happen. It is not feasible. And here's a couple reasons why. The reasons golf was there to be had is because they don't pay the players. You have to earn your money. Obviously, guys make money in endorsements. Tiger Woods, ton of money in Nike. All these guys have different businesses plastered all over them like a NASCAR. But so do NFL players. You ever turn on your television and see the ads and see Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers and Matt Stafford and Aaron Donald and all these guys all over the place? They also make money in endorsements. The main difference is the guy who's made the most in the history of golf on the course is Eldrick Tiger Woods. And his career earnings on the course are like $120 million. He's the only guy in the history of golf to make over $100 million playing on the course. Now, obviously, I think he just became a billionaire, but that's because of his off-the-course ventures, which, as we all know with the athletes nowadays, they're making a lot of money off the field, off the court, off wherever. They make a ton of money. But they also make a ton of money on the playing field. The Warriors have 4 guys who are under contract for well over $100 million. So when the USFL happened, and reading Steve Young's book, learned a lot about it because Steve Young, Reggie White, and Jim Kelly back in the mid-'80s were 3 of the biggest guys to go. And they got an astronomical amount of money relative to the time in like 82, 83, 84, right? Guys, the NFL was not paying anywhere near what they pay now. Hell, when I was a kid looking back at seeing some of the contracts that like Emmitt Smith and Troy Aikman and Brett Favre signed in the 90s, you're like, God damn, that's like special team money now. But listen, times change, money's all relative. The thing is now, in the sport of football, the top players are compensated. They've never made more money. The average top quarterback makes between $35 and $45 million. Look at the money that these defensive players are making. We have several pass rushers making $27 to $32 million. We have a ton of wide receivers making in the 20s. Trent Williams, the star left tackle, makes like $20 million a year. So, and they also have the capability to make money off the field. So the best thing the NFL is going for it right now is that they've never made more money. They've never paid the players more. And listen, the Saudis or some other league, we've seen it before. Post the USFL. And the reason the USFL went under is because unlike the Saudis, most of these startup leagues do not have the cash. I'm sure you've seen the headline. Vince McMahon, not that he paid an affair to be quiet a long time ago, but him and Oliver Luck, Andrew Luck's dad, are going at it. Why? Because when the vid came and the AAF cratered and went bankrupt, or the XFL, I get all my leagues mixed up, they declared bankruptcy. And he's refusing to pay Oliver Luck his like $20 million that he owes him. And they're about to go to court. And not that Vince McMahon doesn't have the money to pay him, but it wasn't feasible. He's like, I'm not going to take a huge loss and keep this league going. So he just cratered it and it went under. And then ultimately, I think they sold it to The Rock for a cheap price. But that is the majority of these leagues. They don't have the finances. And even if someone now did have the finances, the reason these golfers were there to be had, they could give $100 million to Bryson DeChambeau. They could give $200 million to Phil Mickelson. They could give $150 million to Dustin Johnson. Well, Patrick Mahomes signed a $450 million contract. Josh Allen makes $45 million a year. Dak Prescott makes $40. Hell, Minkah Fitzpatrick just now makes $18 million a year. So the NFL, the price and the premiums they're paying for their players is great. It has never been a better time to be an NFL player, whether you're a star player or whether you're just a solid starter. Because a solid starter now makes $4 or $5 million. I've said it forever. The greatest business partnership in the history of the world is the NBA. All the money's guaranteed, and you don't even need to be that good to get paid a premium. Because not just the Steph Currys and LeBrons get paid premiums. A lot of average guys that don't win and don't contribute to the money-making of the league get paid $20 to $25 million. I think the average salary is $7 million in the NBA. And every penny's always guaranteed. It's the greatest partnership in the history of the world. The amount of money that's flowing to a small percentage of individuals is incredible. Now, the Steph Currys, the LeBrons, the Giannis's, they're worth every penny. But you look at the dudes on the Magic, on the Knicks, on some of the shitty teams, they sure as hell are not. And I just think that the NFL is in a great position that they're recession-proof, one, which we know that thing's right around the corner. They are the competition. They are like an empire with a big wall in front of it. You're not getting through. They're paying their talent way too much money, and they're pretty lucky that way. And speaking of paying talent a lot of money, I actually think that the top NFL coaches are very, very underpaid. Like when I was a kid, I loved Arnold Schwarzenegger. Well, I grew up, born in the mid-'80s, so I grew up in the time of like Sly Stallone, Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then the comedians really took off, the Jim Carreys of the world, and they were just box office movie stars. Now, not every one of their movies worked, but when you paid Schwarzenegger $20 million, when you paid Jim Carrey $20 million, when you paid these guys a premium, and now it's turned that way to Leo and some of the modern day actors, obviously to me, Leo, Tom Hanks, some of those type guys, who was in their crew as well, Denzel Washington. More often than not, you were going to have a cash cow movie because the box office used to be a really big deal. Getting me to come to the movie theater. I no longer go to the movie theater. I've been to the movie theater probably 5 times in a decade, and I grew up going to movie. It's now kind of irrelevant. I haven't seen Top Gun yet. A lot of people on the internet say it's incredible. It's like a movie theater movie. I have to do it before it leaves theater, but who knows? That thing might sit in theaters for like 6 months. It's the only thing that anyone's going to see. But when you have someone of value, you pay them a premium because you're ultimately going to make more than what you're going to pay them. It's why in the podcast world, I have to drive people to me. And I'm lucky to be associated with Coward, who the top podcasters, like forever, when I worked in radio, if there are 2 stations, for example, in the Bay Area, I worked at the number 2 station. We had the Raiders and the A's. The big properties here were the Niners and the Giants. The other station had them. If you're on the other station, you might be talented. Tom Tolbert is one of the biggest radio stars here. He's very, very talented and dominated for a long time. But there are other people that aren't that talented that, quote unquote, might rate. It was very hard at the little station, the little engine that could, to rate. We weren't as big. We didn't have the resources, and we didn't have the properties. But if you did when you were there, it proved, you know what, you might be kind of good. Like if I put you on ESPN and you host SportsCenter and it does a big rating after, let's say, an NBA Finals game, and your name is not Scott Van Pelt, I don't know if you're talented enough or not. I don't know if you're talented enough or not because I'm just on the station. But if you have a podcast and all of a sudden it's like 50,000 people choose to listen to this guy, 100,000 people choose to listen to this guy, you're talented. You have something that people want. Call her daddy, Joe Rogan, Colin Cowherd. Just go around, look at the biggest Bill Simmons. They have an audience because people seek them out. I don't have to listen. I don't end up on their channel. YouTube is a great example. Some of these guys with massive, massive YouTube followings, is because we seek them out and they bring something to the table. Period, point blank, end of story. It's why they make the most money. They drive the audience, not a network, not some backing, them individually. Colin does not need a network at this point anymore. Now, maybe at one point in time, a lot of these guys to become stars, him, Dan Patrick, whoever, that helped facilitate and grow their career. No different than the Barstool guys, pardon my take. Barstool and them have been an incredible partnership and helped them grow, but their talent separates from the pack. And I think in football coaching, we just think, well, this is the going rate. I hate that term, the going rate. No, what is the value that you're going to bring to me? The Chargers forever, it's like, well, they can just get this coach because he's not as expensive. And Brandon Staley right now, because he did not have a big resume, is probably one of the lower paid coaches in the league. And listen, you know where I stand on him, but who's to say the next couple years, because of their roster, that the Chargers aren't one of the best teams in the league? And he's vastly underpaid. Why would you even take that risk? Wouldn't you want to go out and try to get a top flight coach, try to pay a premium, try to get a guy that's worth $20, $25 million? Because let's face it, besides your quarterback and maybe a pass rusher, should there be an individual on your team, like an actual player, that is worth more than your coach? We say it all the time. It's a quarterback league and it's a coaching league. So if that's the case, why would you have a $5, $6, $7, $8 million coach? If you want to have a big box office movie, getting Tom Cruise to be in your movie costs $25 million. Getting Leo DiCaprio to be in your movie costs a lot because you know it's going to work. Albert Breer wrote that the Miami Dolphins, when they were thinking about getting Sean Payton, and they were trying to hire him with Tom Brady, and no one loves to, throw that out there quite like the Miami Dolphins. Miami Dolphins were interested in this guy. They were interested in this guy. They almost had Tom Brady. They almost had Sean Payton. It never ends. I got to turn on my AC because it's getting hot. I love Nest because you can just turn it on from your desk. And they didn't get him. But as Albert Breer reported, they offered Sean Payton essentially 4 years, $100 million, $25 million a year. And Breer wrote, it's not really that crazy because he was on an $80 million contract for the Saints. And I go, the $80 million contract, he's probably underpaid. Andy Reid, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, some of these guys, they are underpaid, right? Because how could you have 10 guys on your team making more money than your head coach? How does that add up? I get it in baseball. The baseball manager, a ton of them now, don't even make $1 million. Well, they don't set the lineup. They're not in control of the changes during the game. The front office does it all. It makes more sense to pay the GM more than the manager in baseball. In basketball, you could argue there's somewhat of a happy medium, but essentially you still need a basketball coach to be really good because ultimately he is in charge of stuff, and you need him to communicate to the players. In football, they have to do multiple things. They have to lead, they have to run practice, which the other sports don't really do, and they have to scheme. So you are paying the guy to not just be your leader, but to be your schemer. And to me, the top, however many percentage of coaches in the NFL, even if they make $10 to $14 million, are vastly underpaid. We now know that several teams are worth $3 to $4 billion. And these guys, with your quarterback, are the face of your franchise. So if you're going to be willing to pay a wide receiver, arguably the most replaceable position in the league now, given how many wide receivers come into the NFL every single year, why wouldn't you be willing to pay a top-flight coach $25 million? And I don't want to hear anyone complain when their coach is underachieving or is not good enough, and he makes $7-8 million. That's what you get paid for now. Like, you get what, that $8 million just ain't enough. Nick Saban makes $11-12 million. You could argue he's easily to Alabama worth 20. What is the revenue that you're bringing to the table? We've never known, because the Patriots are very cloak and dagger, how much Belichick makes. Can you imagine the revenue that he generated for Robert Kraft over 2 decades? The amount of money he made that franchise? Now, I'm including Tom as well, but even Tom, quote unquote, underpaid, he made $250 million over his time with the Patriots. So if you're going to go cheap on a coach, or be like, maybe we get this guy for $8 million, like, that's on you when you suck. Because here's what I know. You pay a premium for Sean Payton, you go to the playoffs basically every year. You pay a premium for Andy Reid, you win. You pay a premium for Sean McVay, for Kyle Shanahan, you win. Now, if you take some of these flyers and some of these unknown guys, who knows? Good luck. But I just think that the top coaches in the NFL are easily worth, at this point in time, given the value of the league, the value of the teams, the value of winning, I think you could argue $25 million. Just look at like what CEOs in the NFL, or I mean, in Fortune 500 companies make. Isn't that essentially what these guys are? You're paying the labor a premium. Why wouldn't you pay them? I just think that Sean Payton, when he does come back, is going to make $25 million, and he'll be probably worth every penny. I probably got to take the L on this because I underestimated the Pittsburgh Steelers years ago. And I know we have a lot of new listeners, a lot of people that didn't listen, that are new since this podcast has joined the volume. Before I was just, me and Colin were just pumping out pods. And when they traded the Pittsburgh Steelers, that is, for Minkah Fitzpatrick, I thought it was insane. I thought it was a borderline reckless move. Because if you remember, Roethlisberger had just basically torn whatever it's called when you need Tommy John surgery. He was out for the season. And that was the year that they ended up going with Mason and Duck Hodges combination. And at the time, they made the trade maybe a week after Roethlisberger had torn his elbow. And I thought, you're going to trade a first-round pick for a really good player, but there's a decent chance that you're going to win 3 or 4 games. And the thing that I underestimated is that the Steelers don't view 3 or 4 wins as an option. Internally in their building, the Rooney family, the culture, the mindset of the business, they couldn't fathom doing that. And they ended up going 8-8. They didn't sniff, being in the top 10 in the lottery, in the top 10 of the draft, because that's just not what they do. They adapt and they overcome. Even that year with pitiful and embarrassing quarterback play, they overcame it and got to 8 wins. It was an incredible accomplishment. At the time, I tipped my hat to Mike Tomlin. I think it's one of the better coaching jobs he's done probably in his career. I know he's won a Super Bowl. I know he's had some great teams. But it's one thing to have great teams when your Hall of Fame quarterback is balling. It's another thing to compete in games with a guy named Duck Hodges. And I'm sure Duck Hodges is a nice guy, bad football player. But I think the best businesses in America have a couple things in common. They are consistent with their actions, but they also pick and choose when to put their balls on the table. Because you can't be successful, whether it's in the NFL or whether it's in other industries in the private sector, without taking big swings. Because the easiest thing in life is just to stay in the slow lane and not take any risks. And the reality is when you do that, you get lapped. You get lapped. We reward people in this society for hanging out in this fast lane. That's a fact. Now, sometimes you crash. You're not always going to get to your destination the fastest. It's not always going to work perfectly. But there's a reason that the fruit is on the edges of the branches, not on the trunk of the tree. So you got to be willing to go out on a limb every once in a while. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I would say would tend to be on the conservative side, took a huge swing. And you know what they took a huge swing for? A guy that was in his second year that I would be shocked, and if you're a diehard Steelers fan, I'm sure this has been reported on and talked about over the years. This guy was probably one of their top 3 or 4 guys graded in that given draft. And here's what we know about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Quarterback, they got to prove some stuff. We'll see about that position. But every other position, they can draft as well as anyone in the league. And they saw a guy that I'm sure in their draft meetings they thought was going to be a future Hall of Famer. I remember when I was with the Eagles, and we needed a middle linebacker. And we were hoping, I think we were drafting like 11 or 12. It was the year that we ended up getting Fletcher Cox. And Luke Kuechly was in that draft. And for a while, we're like, I think we're going to get Luke Kuechly. And then the combine happens, and Kuechly ran like a 4.4. And then Andy Reid was basically like, yeah, this guy's going to go to the Hall of Fame. I mean, this guy's never lasting till we draft. And he didn't. He was gone. And we ended up trading for D'Amico Ryans, who I actually saw at practice a couple weeks ago, and I went up to him. He didn't remember me, but I said, I followed his career closely. I was like, I was in Philly when we traded for you. It's awesome to see you balling. Basically, I was hoping to get him on a podcast in the future, laying the groundwork. But the point of the moral of the story is, once there's certain guys in a draft that teams go, we might not get this guy, but this guy's going to be a superstar. And I would imagine the Pittsburgh Steelers thought about that with Minkah Fitzpatrick. So when they took a huge swing, maybe it wasn't that crazy because they don't view themselves as 4 wins as a possibility. And they also view themselves, when we're going to trade a first-round pick for this guy, even if we did draft 5th overall or 8th overall in the future, this guy would have been worthy of that pick. And then it turns out a couple years later, he's been one of the best defensive players in the league now for 4 straight years. They gave a ton of money to. And it's well worth it because whenever you watch the Steelers, Minkah Fitzpatrick is literally everywhere. He's a physical player. He can play the ball. He can cover. There's like nothing he can't do. And from all accounts, he's a great guy. He's the type guy the Steelers love. He's kind of like the modern-day Rod Woodson for them. Like, he has Hall of Fame upside. So I tip my hat to Colbert and Tomlin and the organization for pulling the trigger when, let's face it, I was not alone. A lot of people thought it was nuts. And looking back, not only was it not nuts, it's the type moves in life, anyone listening to this, you got to be willing to make. Because most times when you go out on a limb, especially when times are a little up in the air, people will call you nuts. People will say you're an idiot. It's why you got to be very careful asking for life advice from family and friends. There are certain people you can, but a lot of people don't quite understand all the variables. Only you truly know what's in your gut and what is right in front of you and what the future may hold if you do a certain move. You are the best indicator of the future because you control everything. And I think the Steelers knew, we get this guy in here, sky's the limit. And they got him in there, and sky was immediately the limit. And he's a big-time ass kicker. I did this thing a couple weeks ago about potential people in the media. And because Drew Brees basically got fired, I said, of course he did. I mean, listen, great guy, great player, kind of boring. I mean, Drew Brees puts you to sleep. You know, anyone at NBC, the amount of people, listen, having been in this business for a little while, the amount of people in quote-unquote executive roles making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 at some of these companies that are in charge of hiring are pulling an all-time scam artist. I mean, they are legally stealing from their companies. They got no fucking clue what they're doing. And they keep throwing shit at the wall, hoping some of it sticks. It's no different Jason Witten and Booger McFarland. Again, nice guys, good people. It was embarrassing. You can't roll that out. I could have told you that. It doesn't take, you don't need to be in the business long to know that's not going to work. Well, I've said for a while, like anyone that's followed Richard Sherman's career, Richard Sherman is the total package. Stanford educated, tough guy, great player, articulate about just life and football. There's literally nothing he doesn't bring to the table. And when Amazon bought the NFL's Thursday night package, I say, awesome. A lot of people push back like, how's my grandpa supposed to watch? I don't know. Buy a fucking $200 60-inch TV at Target, Smart TV, and sign up for Amazon Prime. It ain't that hard. It's pretty easy. Honestly, it would take an hour to go to Target, get the TV, plug it in, sign up for Amazon Prime. Not very difficult. If that's your excuse, I think you're living in like 1996 at this point. I mean, we're almost closer to 2023 than we are 2022. Like all of a sudden you're going to wake up, it's going to be 2030. Time to adapt. Time to get on with our lives here. Stop holding on to the past. It's on Amazon, easy to consume. But when they did it, they were going for big swings. They tried to get John Lynch to pair up with Al Michaels, which a guy, Hall of Fame player, who'd been a GM, well-spoken, good-looking, Stanford guy also, no-brainer. He turned down, he admitted, $15 million a year. Let me repeat. John Lynch turned down $15 million a year. I've said over and over, having someone that does this for a living and worked in the league, and I was never a GM, I was just, one of the minions helping him out, is the time constraint that and he's not making $15 million as the GM. That guy's a football junkie. That guy loves being in the trenches of football more than he cares about money. He's not doing this for the money. He's doing this for the juice of winning a playoff game. Because winning at Lambeau Field as a 7-point underdog, there is no amount of money, if you're a football guy, that can give you that juice. You hear gamblers talk about it. Phil Mickelson gambling problem. Saw Charles Barkley on the Golf Channel talking like, I love to gamble. And you know what? I raise my hand. I do too. There is a juice to gambling that I don't get anywhere else in life. I don't get when I do a massive business deal. I don't get, I mean, even personally in some other areas, there's nothing like it. And there is nothing like to a football guy, whether you're a coach, whether you're a player, whether you're executive, winning a big game. To me, ultimately, it didn't mean that much. I get more out of those other aspects of life. It's why I've never, ever thought about going back. But to John Lynch, I respect the shit out of him and his love of football. Because if you turn down $15 million, hats off to you. He's the opposite of the LIV guys. But once they struck out on him, to me, getting Herbstreit, who again, I had some people in my DMs like, you're being mean to Herbstreit. I love Kirk Herbstreit. I think Kirk Herbstreit is fantastic doing college games. He's awesome. He's been doing it now for multiple decades. The morning show, College Game Day, which is not as good anymore. In part, it's no fault of anyone's own. Lee Corso's he's just so old, and obviously he's not quite there anymore. It's honestly kind of sad. But in its heyday, that's one of the best sports shows. Honestly, I would put College Game Day in its heyday right there with Barkley, Ernie, and Kenny. It's one of the greatest pre- or post-game shows in the history of sports. And it'll never be topped, probably. There have been a lot of shows to come on. Fox has a good one now. It's not even close. And once they put Fraud Meyer back on that show, like I'm sorry, I can't look at Fraud Meyer ever again in the face. I can't take the guy seriously. But when it comes to signing Kirk Herbstreit, and listen, I don't know for sure if he would have done this, because I saw that Sherman said that he's still holding out hope and he's going to stay in shape, but opportunities like this come, you can't turn this down. Why didn't they just make Richard Sherman the analyst to go with Al Michaels? Why didn't they just put Richard Sherman in the booth and pay him $15 million? Because they could have paid Richard Sherman what they were willing to pay John Lynch, and then he's not going to make that much money. Hell, when he was an all-pro for the 49ers, he made like $12 million. Just pay him that to do it. He's smart enough. He's a big enough personality. He would have figured it out just fine. I don't understand why they just didn't throw the bag of money at Richard. So when I turn on Amazon this fall, with maybe your grandpa's missing it, but all of us under 70 years old will not be, Richard Sherman and Al Michaels, it would have been an easy no-brainer. But I don't know who's making these decisions. Kirk Herbstreit, because he's called a couple NFL games the last several years for ESPN? Like, he's a college guy. Now, again, the NFL is easier than college, but why not just hire an NFL guy who's been in the league now for a decade, who knows the entire league, who knows all the coaches, and while he, quote-unquote, doesn't have experience, he would figure it out, and he would figure it out really fast. I don't think it would be that difficult, especially on a streaming service. It would have been fine. So I think that ultimately Amazon made a mistake by not just going all in. Now, I know Richard is going to do the pre- and post-game show, but let's face it, that's not as important as the actual game. And I think it would have been an easy one. The other thing that I keep seeing, and I saw this guy interviewed yesterday, and oh my God, he might be the biggest guy in the NFL. He is a massive, massive human being. And listen, left tackles are huge. When I was with the Eagles, we had Jason Peters. He was enormous. Just at Niners practice, seeing Trent Williams, fucking massive human beings. This guy's bigger, and his name is Mekhi Becton. And when Joe Douglas a couple years ago drafted this guy, he passed on several other guys. And Tristan Wirfs, now a couple years later, is clearly the better player, more consistent human. And if you could redo the pick, you would have taken him, not Becton. But I have no problem, and I say this all the time, when you're drafting really high, swinging for the fences. But when you swing for the fences, and I was terrible at baseball, but I have friends that were good that played in college, and they will say, like, when you swing to try to hit a home run, especially if you have a little bit of an uppercut, you're not trying to drive the ball, if they throw the pitch in a different area than you think, you will miss. And right now, let's face it, Becton has been a disaster for the Jets. Now, Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh, they've benched him. They've just had some issues with him. And clearly the number one thing is, and I learned this when I was in the NFL, with defensive linemen and offensive linemen. And I think this holds true for any athlete. The bigger you are, when I'm talking about weight, you're just inherently a little lazier. Why? It's just basic science, right? It's physics. The more weight I have to carry around, the harder it is to operate. I remember Deshaun Jackson. He couldn't run all summer long, show up. He wouldn't break a sweat. He's 165 pounds. Tyreek Hill. You think the guy ever gets tired? Mekhi Becton's the big defensive tackles, like they're huffing and puffing for a reason. They carry around more weight. Just like it takes more horsepower to pull a boat than it does to pull a Pinto. I mean, it's just basic math. And when you get these guys, and the number one question on Becton specifically was how he would handle his weight. Because remember, it could get up to almost 400 pounds. And that's when he was in college. So it was a lot of red flags all over the league. And it made people nervous. To a much smaller level, Jordan Davis, the Eagles pick, just had some of those questions like, is he too... Zion Williamson battles that. Because it's a legitimate question. The asset is the player's body. Now, the thing Becton had, great athlete, great feet. In scouting terms, they're considered dancing bears. I was in Tahoe a couple weeks ago. When a bear goes by, you kind of back up. Because you know deep down, the massive bear can run way faster than you. And Becton is a special, special talent. But his weight issues are coming to fruition. Like, they are a massive problem. And if you don't keep that weight down, a couple things come into play. One, you're more likely to get injured because the bigger you are. You saw at Shaq's end of his career. He got so big, he got injured a lot. And it's just hard to stay in shape. It's very, very difficult to be like, yeah, I'm 375 pounds and I'm in great shape. I would say most great left tackles, even the bigger ones, Trent Williams, Jason Peters would be examples, could be and look really good at 335 pounds. But if they were 360 pounds, you'd have a problem. And I think the Jets right now have a problem on their hands because this guy is teeter-tottering. And I know he said, I'm in for a big year. I'm going to make everyone eat their words. To me, the number one thing with him, he's got to be very careful about what he eats moving forward. And not just eats, but his workout plans and staying focused, which can be difficult when you're that big. Because like I said, you're inherently a little lazier because it's harder for you to work. It's easier for me to have energy and work out when I'm 175 pounds than when I'm 200 pounds. Whatever the body weight is relative to your body, that comes into play here. And I think that has come into play here for the Jets and Becton. But if he gets it together and he focuses, he's still a really young player, they could have one of the best tackles in the league. And that position, if he is a Pro Bowl level player, is then immediately one of the most valuable players in the league because that's a $25, $22 million player. And he protects the blind side of your quarterback. But if you're constantly going back and forth, benching him, worrying about his weight, like you have a bigger, and he's not playing well, you have a bigger headache than you do a talent. And that ultimately gets back to, which I commend because I am more likely than not going to support making these decisions on draft night, swing for the fences. But right now it looks like Joe Douglas is more likely to strike out on this pitch than to hit a home run. Now he still has time left. This is a young player. He's not 30 years old. But this is a massive, massive year. And I get a lot of people that DM me about the Jets specifically because to me the two New York teams are in completely different lanes. The Giants should bottom out unless Daboll can resurrect Daniel Jones' career and then Daboll would immediately be viewed as a top offensive coach in the league. But in a perfect world, their cap situation, their talent, their lacking of talent, the Giants should basically just bottom out and restart next year. They have a new GM. They have a new coach. That's what I would do. Where the Jets now bottom out a couple years ago, have had an influx of all these draft picks, and they have a young quarterback. Like, listen, I don't think they need to make the playoffs, but I think anything less than 7-10, it's like, do they get the right GM and the right head coach? And a huge Robert Saleh guy. Don't know Douglas, but I'm rooting for the guy. But, like, ultimately, this is a black and white league. Do you win or do you lose? This isn't moral victories and all that stuff go out the window once the season comes. You just get judged. It's one of the greatest businesses in America because there's no, well, they got great technology, but they're not turning a profit. Well, you know, they got this incredible product, but they're just not selling it yet. No, it's like, we won 10 games and we made the playoffs. Or no, we won 5 games and we fired our coach. Like at the end of the year, it's very cut and dry whether you had success or whether you did not have success. Now, you could argue for most teams, 7-10 is not a successful year. But given where the Jets are, 7-10, winning some big games, maybe upsetting some teams, and just getting the momentum and looking like your quarterback is successful. Getting Becton on the field all season long and having some success. Have these two young wide receivers and the young running back, some of your young defensive players look good, is a really, really big deal in a franchise that's just desperate for something positive to happen. Thanks for watching 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description, and make sure you subscribe right now to the Volumes YouTube channel.